Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The frequency with which people are buried alive in movies makes you unconsciously believe that this never occurs in real life. Regretfully, incidents like this do happen, and the best evidence of this is a story that happened in Huddersfield, UK 10 years ago. Marcin and Micolina fell in love right away. When their feelings waned, however, Micolina insisted that it was time for her to move abroad and begin a new life. Marcin, though, would sooner kill her than let it happen. Not all people separate like well-mannered adults do. Some people think they can literally bury all of their problems in the ground. Here, 19-year-old Marcin Kaspak and 21-year-old Micolina Lewandowski first crossed paths in their home country of Poland in 2005. A year later, Marcin asked Micolina to marry him, and the two of them relocated to the UK to begin a new life together. But things soured between them in 2008 after Micolina found out she was expecting a child. They canceled their engagement, but they still lived together in Marcin's parents' home. Micolina wore her engagement ring even after the engagement ended because she still loved Marcin and hoped they could resolve their differences. That was not meant to be, unfortunately. By 2011, Marcin's lack of interest in making amends with Micolina was clear. In an effort to stay away from her, he trained 5 times a week at the gym and spent nearly all of his free time there. Unexpectedly, however, Marcin asked Micolina to accompany him and his friend, 18-year-old Patrick Boris, on a shopping trip on Saturday, May 28, 2011. Micolina was taken aback because Marcin didn't often show an interest in hanging out with her. Still, she was relieved and hoped that things would get better now. The girl quickly went to the restroom to apply makeup. Jakub, their 3-year-old son, was fortunately with his grandmother, Marcin's mother, on that particular day, and was not present when the events transpired. Upon exiting the restroom, Micolina noticed Patrick and Marcin gazing at her with a horrifying smile on their lips. Taking Micolina's hand, Marcin said, "I want to show you something." Then he took a 300,000-volt stun gun out of his pocket, put it to her neck, and pressed the trigger. The agony swept through Micolina's body as she collapsed to the ground. Bodybuilder Marcin, who weighed 101 kg, saw her convulse from the electric shock while kneeling on her chest and holding her down on the ground. Momentarily regaining consciousness, Micolina asked Marcin if he meant to murder her, to which he replied that she should not be afraid, as he would simply take her somewhere. Patrick was then told to get some packing tape. The men taped Micolina's mouth shut, gagged her, and then tied her wrists and ankles. They shocked her with electricity once more before abandoning her, frightened and bound. Even though she initially believed it to be a mean joke, she was now certain of their true motivations. She was immobile and worried about fainting, not knowing if she would ever regain consciousness. Micolina was hauled into the kitchen and crammed into a cardboard box by Marcin and Patrick a few hours later. One day, they brought up a plastic bag. Marcin started to tape the box shut, but she thought they were going to put it over her head to suffocate her. The girl struggled to scream as she lost what little peace she still had. Then Marcin got on his knees, chuckled, and declared, "I've been hating you for 4 years. Your son will never be seen again." His uncanny composure on his face was more terrifying than the hateful words he spoke in this scene. The cardboard box was sealed. Then the men picked it up from both sides, carried it to Patrick's car, and put it in the trunk. The girl knew they had gone far before Patrick and Marcin took the box away. Micolina felt her back being scratched by the stones as the men pulled her along the ground. The fact that Marcin and Patrick had taken her to a wooded area close to Huddersfield was hidden from her inside the box. After digging a shallow grave beforehand, they buried the box containing Micolina inside. Micolina was lying in the box, still in excruciating pain and terrified, when she heard the men hurling dirt onto her grave. The box itself was dark and extremely small. In an attempt to keep from passing out, Micolina began breathing as shallowly as she could, because she was certain she would suffocate. In an effort to determine whether the car had moved on so she could start to flee, she strained her hearing. That Marcin would hit her with a shovel if they were still around when she tried to escape was no longer a possibility. Even though Micolina was unable to hear a car leaving, she eventually made the decision to take action, whether or not they were in the area. She made an effort to maintain her composure despite the thousands of ideas racing through her mind. She would later admit that she kept going because she was thinking about her little boy, Jakub. She would never see him again if she passed away, and he would be left motherless. She could not let that occur. Looking down at her restrained wrists, Micolina realized she had her diamond engagement ring, which she could use to break free. Micolina was able to sever the tape that bound her mouth, hands, and feet with the ring's sharp edges. She started scratching at the box's cardboard after that. After some time, she managed to make a tiny hole in the cardboard, which she discovered was a little damp, perhaps from the wet dirt that had been piled on top of it. Through the gap, Micolina stuck her fingers out and ripped the box apart. She only felt dirt, though, the same dirt that had been thrown on her grave by her boyfriend. She was still unaware at the time that, in addition to the meter-deep layer of dirt they had buried her beneath, they had also positioned a 40-kilogram log on top to make sure she couldn't get out. As more and more dirt soaked into the box, it covered her clothes, hair, and face. Micolina cried out for assistance, but no one was there to hear her. Her body shook with pain, and she grew weary, but she knew that continuing on was essential if she hoped to see her son again. "Don't give up," she said to herself again. Simply, don't give up. Micolina persisted in pushing, tearing, and pounding at the cardboard box until she managed to reach out her whole hand and raise her head above the floor. She breathed in the fresh air with anticipation. She could see the sky above her head, the trees, and the leaves, even though it was dark. Even though Micolina was completely covered in dirt and had lost all her strength, she no longer had any doubts about her ability to get away. Finally, she was able to pull herself up and claw her way out from under the ground with one last effort. After being in the box for an hour, Micolina miraculously emerged from her grave. In addition to surviving, she saved herself by using the diamond engagement ring that her would-be murderer had given her. Running toward the road from the woods, Micolina signaled a passing vehicle. That the driver didn't run away in fear when he saw a weak, dirt-covered woman come out onto the road was a great blessing for her. He listened to her and then stopped to call the police to find out what had happened. Micolina showed the police the cardboard box where she had been left to suffer her last moments in horrifying pain when they arrived at the crime scene 15 minutes later. Without a doubt, Marcin had never been more terrified in his life than he was when the police knocked on his door and told him he was being taken into custody on charges of attempted murder and kidnapping. He resisted for a long time, claiming that his intention was not to kill Micolina, but simply to frighten her. But no one took this defense seriously, so it didn't do him much good. After leaving Micolina to die, the men took PS500 from an ATM using her bank card, went home, and began playing video games, as the police quickly learned. In fact, Marcin was not planning to return for Micolina. His idea was completely different. Marcin, 25, was a dedicated bodybuilder who had become dependent on anabolic steroids, which led to his frequent outbursts. He concluded that it would be best for his son to grow up without a mother at all, after learning that Micolina had decided to leave the fight for their relationship and was going to return to Poland with Jakub. Micolina would not be able to raise his grandson as well as his own mother. With the intention of killing his ex-fiancée, he came up with one of the most horrific ways to end her life. Marcin was given a 20-year prison term after being found guilty of attempted murder and kidnapping in January 2012. Although Patrick was convicted of kidnapping, he was not found guilty of attempted murder. He received a 4.5-year sentence in a juvenile detention center. Both men were not eligible for parole until they had completed half of their sentences. Marcin won't, however, be available for purchase anytime soon. The police searched his parents' home, where he lived with Micolina and their son after he was arrested. The house contained a variety of chemicals and instructions for making explosives, according to the police. Consequently, Marcin received 8 more 4-year sentences for the explosives, while already serving his sentence for attempted murder. I prevented him from achieving his goal of killing me in the most horrific manner possible, even though he wished for my demise. I battled my way out of that grave with the last of my strength. Following the delivery of the guilty verdict, Micolina remarked, "Now it is he who is imprisoned." Even after learning that her ex-lover had received a 20-year sentence, Micolina is still terrified. Despite having moved to a different home far from Huddersfield with her son, whose address is kept secret for their safety, Micolina acknowledged following the trial that she still has nightmares about what she endured. I was buried alive and trapped in that shallow grave, and I was afraid that my life was over and that I would pass away. In order to survive and care for my young son, I prayed to God. I had the courage to leave that box and flee when I thought of my son. I had a deep affection for Marcin Kasbak for many years, but after the terrible attack on me, my affections for him deteriorated into hatred. I still have nightmares about Marcin returning, finding me, and killing me. I'm hoping he understands how wrong what he did to me was. The difficulties I faced that day, at the hands of a man I trusted and loved, are something I hope no one else will ever have to go through. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The discovery of the victim's body is usually the first piece of information we receive after a murder. From that point forward, the police begin their investigation to determine what happened and who committed the crime. But not this time. In this case, the typical scenario was disrupted when the victim identified their assailant before he committed the crime. This story occurred recently, in early May 2022, in the city of Peleon Norte de Santander department, one of Colombia's 32 departments. In this city, there lived a 16-year-old girl named Anna Karina Blanco Duran. She was the oldest of 3 children in a modest family, similar to many others in the region. However, this had no impact on Karina's personality or dreams. She was in the 11th grade and eagerly awaiting graduation. Karina's relatives and friends described her as disciplined and determined, but also cheerful, sociable, and optimistic. However, like most teenagers, she had doubts. She expressed her thoughts in a letter she wrote for a school assignment 2 weeks ago. In the letter, the girl stated that, like everyone else, she had goals that she wanted to achieve. However, at the time, she was preoccupied with being happy, studying, and assisting her mother, whom she described as a beautiful, strong, and resilient woman who had a huge influence over her. The following year, the girl intended to attend university and study psychology or philosophy. This would allow her to pursue her dreams, the most important of which was to buy a house for her mother. At the same time, Karina acknowledged her overwhelming fears and doubts. She wrote that she was afraid of growing up and facing the big world alone. She sometimes wished she could go back in time and play with dolls again, something she didn't get to do as a child because she had to grow up quickly and help her parents. Karina, almost prophetically, explained what would happen to her in 2 weeks in her final sentence. She wrote that she feared human evil, and she was not mistaken. What she was afraid of eventually shattered her dreams. Karina awoke early on May 3, 2022, as she usually does. She lived in La Vega, a village in the Cashra municipality. Karina had to walk for at least an hour every day along several country roads to the bus stop that would take her to school because her village was relatively remote. The morning progressed as usual. The student awoke, ate breakfast, said her goodbyes to her family, and left the house at 5:30 a.m. However, shortly after Karina left, her father began receiving messages from her. It was unusual. Karina wrote to her father that while walking down the country road, she noticed someone following her. A man was approaching her very closely. When the girl quickened her pace, the stranger did the same. If she attempted to take a different path, he would follow her. Karina was understandably uneasy and suspicious. She mustered the courage to take a discreet photo of the stranger and send it to her father so he would know who was after her. Cesar Blanco, Karina's father, became extremely concerned for his daughter's safety. He dashed out of the house, taking the same route to the bus stop that she had taken, but he couldn't find her anywhere. The man assumed the danger was over and Karina had safely boarded the bus. Unfortunately, this was not the case. Karina's parents were later informed by the school that she did not attend class that day. Karina's parents reported her disappearance to the police. Because it was a small village where everyone knew each other, word of the incident spread quickly among the locals. The girl's family distributed a photograph of the stranger who had been following her since the morning. A few hours later, a man who worked at a local farm mentioned another farm worker who looked very similar to the man in the photograph. Despite the blurry image, he believed he recognized him. Additionally, that worker was late for work on the same day. Armed with this information, several villagers and Karina's relatives went to the farm where these men worked and demanded answers from the person Karina had most likely photographed. The man in question was Alexander Keogh, a 55-year-old Venezuelan native. He had arrived in town 4 months ago and was staying with a relative. Alexander had found work on the farm where he was located. The people were outraged by the schoolgirl's disappearance and acted aggressively. He eventually admitted to assaulting Karina, killing her, and disposing of her body in the Kashra River. It's understandable that the villagers, particularly Karina's relatives, wanted to take matters into their own hands following such a confession. However, the police arrived just on time. The officers apprehended the suspect, rescuing him from the angry mob. The police took Alexander Carrillo to the station and began interrogation. He repeated what he had previously told the villagers. He admitted to killing the schoolgirl and revealed where her body was disposed of. Following the crime, he cleaned himself up, changed his blood-stained clothes for clean ones, and returned to work. The man truly believed he would never be found, unaware that the victim had taken a photograph of him. During the interrogation, villagers gathered near the station. They were furious and wanted to take matters into their own hands. Concerned for the man's safety and believing his life was in danger, the police decided to transport him to another location. They escorted the suspect out of the station and attempted to get him into the car. However, when the crowd began to act, they dragged Carrillo from the vehicle and attacked him. The police couldn't intervene because there were so many of them. The mob beat the perpetrator with sticks and stones before someone attacked him with a knife, killing him. Even after that, the crowd refused to disperse and blocked the police from approaching until they were certain that the man had died. Karina's body was discovered on the riverbank, exactly where her assailant had indicated. Her bag was nearby. The girl was partially undressed, and the autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted. She died of 2 penetrating wounds to her chest and neck. According to the police, Alexander Carrillo had been watching Karina for several days, meeting her every morning as she walked to school while he went to work. This version is supported by the fact that, a few days before the attack, Karina informed her school friends that she was being followed by a stranger, which made her extremely uncomfortable. The police have stated that the investigation will not be terminated at this time. They will investigate the actions of the local police officers who allowed the man's lynching, as well as who initiated the attack and delivered the fatal blow. According to local media reports, it was a relative of Karina, but the individual's identity has not been revealed. Pain and outrage swept through the city. An event was organized at Karina's school to honor her memory, while also protesting the killing of women. Students and teachers wrote an open letter to express their outrage at the current state of affairs. She wasn't drinking, she was not dressed provocatively, she wasn't in a bar. She walked to school every weekday wearing rubber boots because she lived on a farm, and she, like many other boys and girls in the country, had to overcome obstacles in order to receive an education. She feared that someone was following her. She was just 16, terrified. Her dreams, desires, and life were stolen from her. After Karina's voice was silenced, all that remained were the voices of those of us who demanded a safer environment and normal families in which children were taught not to hit, violate, or murder one another. Karina's killer did not see her as a person with her own life, dreams, and loving family, so the villagers decided to repay him in kind. Lynching is considered unacceptable by many, and it has no place in a civilized society. However, for many others, it simply reflects a lack of faith in the justice system. They are dissatisfied with the prevalence of impunity and the fact that the criminal will never face the harshest penalties. They believe the police are not doing their jobs, so they have decided to take action to remedy the situation. It is heartbreaking to see girls who leave for school and never return, becoming victims of murder. But in this case, Karina was the one who exposed the criminal. Karina did not behave recklessly. She immediately sensed the danger emanating from the persistent stranger, secretly photographing him and sending it to her father. She let him be caught before he could harm another innocent girl. Unfortunately, it was too late for her. However, without that photograph, the police could have gone days, months, or even years without finding the killer. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments What part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Gazella Diode heard her phone ring at 2 in the morning on March 1, 2011. The screen displayed an unidentified number. A Valence police officer approached her and inquired as to whether she was Samira Bernard's mother. Gazella said yes, but she didn't understand why the police were searching for Samira, her 20-year-old daughter. It had been 3 days since she last saw her. The police response did nothing to calm the woman, who demanded an explanation of what was going on. According to the call, Samira's boyfriend, Micolina, 22, had vanished, so they were looking for her. The young couple had been dating for 8 months, the police had found out, but Gazella had no knowledge of the man. Mile had met Samira at a party. Samira Ben-Sard was a stunning woman who knew she was beautiful. She enjoyed posing for pictures and aspired to be a model. In turn, Mile was a very pleasant and kind young man. Their attraction to one another was instantaneous, and they began dating. But at 9:45 p.m. on February 28, 2011, Mile's supervisor at the construction company called the police. Since he hadn't heard from his employee in 3 days, he was concerned. When the man arrived at work on Saturday morning, his phone rang. Without giving a reason, he hurried to his feet and disappeared, never to be seen again. His boss was taken aback when he still hadn't arrived on Monday morning. It was his first absence from work, and they regarded him as a responsible and punctual worker. After learning that Mile was not returning calls from friends and co-workers, his boss made the decision to call the police. The police first visited the man's residence in Valence's downtown, but their efforts were unsuccessful, as no one answered the doorbell, nor was his car at the house. The police spoke with Mile's mother that same evening. She mentioned that she hadn't heard from her son in 3 days and that he had acted strangely during their most recent meeting, acting tense and very emotional. The woman reported that her son, who had never done so before, gave her a hug, kissed her, and declared his love for her. The investigators found some very suspicious details. Samira and Mile vanished the same day without telling anyone why, and they hadn't spoken to their families in 3 days. It couldn't have happened by accident. Analyzing their phones yielded one hint. The investigators discovered that Samira and Mile did not simply depart simultaneously, rather they drove off together. According to the phone pings, they left for Nice in the middle of the day on Saturday and checked into a 5-star hotel on the promenade in the evening. After getting in touch with the hotel, the investigators discovered that 2 men and a woman were being recorded by security cameras. Samira and Mile fit the description exactly. By Sunday evening, they had traveled from Nice to Livorno, 400 kilometers east of the French-Italian border. It was evident that the young couple was moving deeper into Italy, so the French police asked their Italian counterparts for help. Mile had made reservations at a high-end Livorno hotel. A man and a woman who fit the description of the missing couple had stayed with the hotel, according to the staff. Thus, they spent Saturday night in Nice before traveling to Livorno the following day. Everything suggested that Samira and Mile had taken a haphazard romantic trip, which was not surprising given how popular the Riviera was for such excursions. Since Samira's mother had received a message from her daughter saying that she had left, but that there was no need to worry because she would return soon, the detectives had no reason to doubt their belief that the young couple would soon return home together. Although it appeared to be another affirmation that the young couple was doing well, Gazella was positive her daughter would never vanish simply by taking an impulsive vacation. Samira never skipped work and was a responsible woman. Additionally, Gazella was troubled by a detail. She couldn't comprehend how her daughter, who loved being photographed and never left the house without wearing carefully chosen clothes, applying makeup and styling her hair, could leave for several days with a young man without taking anything with her. The fact that Samira sent an SMS also baffled her. The problem is that she would typically just give her mom a call. Since they were close and could talk for hours, getting a text message didn't make her feel any better. On the contrary, it made her anxiety even worse. The city of Imperia, which is about 80 kilometers from Nice in northern Italy, provided the next update on the case. Massimo Bessin was traveling to work on Monday, March 3, 2011, when he decided to take a shortcut and turned onto a small street. Something odd caught his attention along the road. When he opened the door, he saw that it was a woman, but initially he thought he saw a mannequin. Massimo yelled something but got no answer, but the woman was obviously on the move. He summoned an ambulance in a hurry. She was identified by Italian police as the French woman who had gone missing. Her skull was pierced by a bullet that had been shot in the back of her head. At this point, the romantic trip theory could be disregarded. The French police couldn't understand. They first believed it to be a romantic escape, then it was a suspicious disappearance, and now they were dealing with a girl who had been injured in an attempted murder. Despite being critically ill, Samira was still alive. Her mother was notified and she was taken to the hospital right away. At first, Gazella didn't even recognize her own daughter when she got to the hospital. The sight is hard to describe. Samira looked like a 9-year-old girl with her head shaved bald. The woman found it hard to accept that her daughter had been shot in the head and ended up in Italy. Since the bullet was embedded in her daughter's skull, the doctors informed the mother that there was little chance of recovery. Gazella refused to accept this and made arrangements for Samira to be taken to a hospital in Marseille. She was told directly by a surgeon there that although he would do the surgery, he would not give her false hope. The patient would never fully recover, even if she lived. Samira had surgery for 10 hours. Despite surviving the surgery, she was unable to speak and did not recognize anyone when she opened her eyes. Like a child, she had to relearn everything. Samira was unable to provide any information regarding the events in Italy, but without her testimony, the police had to look for the perpetrator. There were numerous signs that the crime was being planned. The Italian police were unable to locate any of her possessions when they discovered her lying on the side of the road close to a landfill. No passport, no phone, and no purse were present. This suggested that the criminal did not want her name to be revealed, but the investigators had a lead. Samira's boyfriend, Mile Cambia, was the last person they saw her with. According to the police, Mile fled after committing the crime by crossing the border into Italy, but after Samira was discovered, he erred by using his bank card in France. Only 35 kilometers from his Valence apartment, he used it at a first-rate hotel in Les Turrets. Mile had returned to France the day before according to surveillance footage. But why didn't he return home to his family if he was innocent? He chose to stay in a hotel a few kilometers away instead. Investigators soon learned that he had used Samira's credit card, which was another error on his part. In other words, Miles stayed in a hotel and used the woman's card while the young couple went on an impromptu trip to another country, where the woman almost died. The worst suspicions of the police were validated by everything. The detective talked to the young man's friends and family in an attempt to find a motive. Samira and Miles' relationship was evidently far from ideal. Miles was bothered by the fact that Samira was a very attractive woman and that many men were interested in her. Their disagreements frequently turned violent. In front of their friends, Miles had the authority to slap Samira, and once he even put out a cigarette on her. He was obviously not a particularly stable individual. However, the motive remained a mystery. Was everything prearranged? Or did Miles act out of rage? Despite Miles' actions, all of their friends were aware that Samira was smitten with him. She'd just learned, though, that her boyfriend was married. He had cheated on his girlfriend on a regular basis after getting married to her when she was 18. He had many mistresses besides Samira. Despite being upset by the information, she didn't end their relationship because she trusted Miles' statement that they were divorcing and living apart. The investigator went to Miles' house after learning of this, but as soon as he stepped inside, he saw that Samira was wrong. The husband and wife were obviously living together. In addition, Miles would soon become a father. The name Combi was written on 17 ultrasound pictures of the apartment. A love triangle involving Miles, his wife, and Samira was clearly in place, and one of them was bound to vanish. Finding Miles was essential, and it was far simpler than the police had expected. 5 days after the disappearance, Mile Cambia turned himself in on March 4 at the Valence police station. The investigation was extremely fortunate to have this. Mile not only willingly arrived at the station, but he also came clean and admitted to shooting Samira. He went on to describe what had transpired. According to the young man, Samira was merely a friend with whom he could have fun. She knew there was no future in their relationship. Samira was unable to accept Miles' explanation that their romance was over. She never left him alone, calling him non-stop and occasionally dialing his number 150 times in a single day. He showed the investigator his phone, which showed evidence of about 1,000 calls from Samira in a month. Although Mile acknowledged that Samira's actions might be categorized as stalking, would this be sufficient grounds to shoot her? The young man soon began to fear for his life as the situation worsened. He described the events of the Friday night before they left for Italy. He was kissing another woman in a nightclub when Samira confronted him. After leaving the club in a hurry and using her key to scratch his car, she got into a fight with Samira's cousins. Mile was frightened by this incident, since they threatened to kill him and claimed to have weapons. Mile was terrified. After deciding that he needed to find a way to protect himself going forward, he hurriedly got into his car and drove out of the nightclub. He considered purchasing a weapon for his personal protection. When he received a call the following day, he left without thinking and went to buy a revolver. Still, none of this clarified why he had shot Samira. Mile clarified that his intention in traveling to Italy was not to murder her or carry out any other heinous deed. All he wanted was for their tumultuous relationship to end. In an attempt to defuse their tense situation and give Samira an explanation, he took her to Italy, but things didn't work out. Mile got out of the car after they argued once more. Samira trailed after him. Mile claims that he did not intend to shoot when he grabbed the weapon, only to frighten her, but the revolver accidentally went off. Then he dropped her to the ground, climbed back into the car, and drove off. He claimed to be afraid when asked why he didn't call for an ambulance. He didn't know what to do, so he went into hiding for a few days after she fell. The police already knew the rest of the story. In general, the man asserted that what transpired in Italy was an accident, and that he was the victim of his compulsive lover's pursuit. The police weren't entirely convinced by his explanation, so he was arrested for attempted murder. A few things didn't add up. Why would someone go abroad and stay in a 5-star hotel only to break up with someone? Why did he use her credit card after stealing all of her personal items, and who used her daughter's phone to send Samira's mother the message? Although it was hard to prove without Samira's testimony, the investigator was certain that the young man was lying. Thankfully, Samira was able to testify after some time and therapy. First, though, Samira spoke very slowly and in a weak voice. She gave her account of what happened 8 months after the attack on October 11, 2011. Samira's statements ran counter to what her ex-lover had said. He said they needed to talk when he arrived at her house. He persisted, so she gave in, even though she didn't want to. She accepted Miles' invitation to a weekend retreat. When she asked him where he wanted to go, he said, Spain. The fact that this upset her made him take her to Nice, and then to Italy. Miles abruptly swerved off the road on the 3rd day of the journey, following 2 days of relaxation. He told her not to worry, saying he just needed to get rid of something, when she questioned why he had turned onto a road that led to a landfill. Miles halted the vehicle and exited. After letting her out through the passenger side door, he took out a revolver and aimed it at her. She was going to die, he said. She yelled, "Shoot if you're a man," and he pulled the trigger. The revolver was discovered by forensic experts on February 7, 2012, 1 year after the attack on Samira, and this finding totally disproved Miles' allegations. He claimed that the gun in his hand suddenly detonated. Ballistic analysis, however, demonstrated that such an occurrence was impossible. The shooter must carefully prepare before firing, pull the trigger back, and then fire. 2 separate actions, the expert explained. The revolver won't just fire when you wave your hand. In addition, the revolver must be held in one hand while a considerable amount of force is applied with the other hand to pull the trigger backward. There was no way such a gun could be accidentally fired. Miles Cambia lied because he intended to murder Samira. Detectives were finally able to piece together the murderer's plan after months of investigation. Miles left work on February 26, 2011 at 9 in the morning. He bought a weapon because he was determined to prevent a recurrence of the scene from the night before. He loaded it, tested it, pulled the trigger, and fired it as he made his way into the woods. Everything had been planned by him. Samira was to vanish across the border after spending a romantic weekend in Italy. Since he had no connections in Italy, it was the ideal place to carry out the crime. Miles pulled the woman out of the car, drove off the road, shot her, and threatened to kill her. In order to avoid identifying her, he then took her possessions. Miles tried to deceive the police by sending Samira's mother an SMS after returning to France. It was assumed that the woman had taken a vacation and was still alive. The man was sure he would never be caught and thought he had committed the ideal crime. You can only imagine how shocked he was to learn that his victim had lived. He hid for 5 days close to his hometown while the police searched for him, thinking about what he should do next. He came up with a new self-defense tactic since he lacked the resources and beneficial contacts to flee. Micolina made the decision to tell his version of events to the police. The trial of Miles started in the city of Valence on February 10, 2014. For the victim and her family, the trial was a true ordeal. Miles stuck to his version of events, much to their astonishment. He maintained that everything that transpired in Italy was a regrettable accident, and that he was the victim in this instance, having been harassed by Samira. According to his friends, he had never been violent and bought the revolver out of fear after Samira's cousins threatened to kill Miles and destroy his car and apartment. He took his phone with him when he drove to Italy, keeping nothing hidden. He was emotionally worn out from Samira's incessant calls and just wanted to take the woman on a trip to help her relax. It is also important to note that Miles charmed the jury with his exaggerated displays of civility and respect throughout the trial. His plan worked, and he received a 13-year prison sentence. The lenient sentence raised questions about whether Miles' actions in court and the jury's decision to impose a relatively short sentence were related. After all, it is hard for people to convict a charming young man with impeccable manners, and they frequently associate criminals with unpleasant personalities. Samira feels that this penalty is excessively light. She will always be confined to a wheelchair because she loved a man who chose to kill her, but by the time he turns 40, he will be free and able to lead a normal life. According to the surgeon, Samira recovered 80% of her abilities in a year of therapy, but the effectiveness of rehabilitation drastically decreased after that, leaving her reliant on assistance for the remainder of her life. She acknowledges that he paid her back in this way because she was prepared to do anything for love. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. One of the most terrifying scenes ever filmed is before you. Actual video of a serial killer on the loose. Because its owner was already being watched by the police, fate stepped in before the murder kit could take another life. From a sunny UK resort to a charming southern Italian town, he left a bloody trail in his wake. The criminal mastermind ridiculed the investigators and misled them by leaving obvious clues close to his victim. The man's bizarre fetish ultimately brought about his terrible demise, but it also motivated him to carry out unspeakably cruel deeds. Far from their busy hometown of Potenza, Italy, the Claps family was getting ready for a relaxing Sunday retreat at a small cottage in Tito on September 12, 1993. Luciano, their 20-year-old son, was with their parents, Antonio and Filomena. Gildo Claps, 24, their oldest son, and Alicia Claps, 16, their youngest daughter, were expected to arrive soon. Together with Alicia's friend Eliana D'Alessio, they were scheduled to arrive in the afternoon. Eliana and Alicia had decided to go to the town center church for a service. The girls then intended to head back to Alicia's house before having lunch at the cottage with the rest of the family. Gildo started to worry when the girls hadn't returned after an hour. His sister would call home if she was going to be late, and she was always on time. Eliana was the one who rang the doorbell. Eliana assumed her friend had already gone home after they parted ways at the church. The fact that Alicia was still missing shocked Eliana. Gildo wandered around the town center, worried, trying to find his sister. Alicia was not in the crowd of people that gathered around the church. The rest of the family returned to Potenza to inquire about the situation after Gildo and Alicia failed to show up by 2 p.m., and they were shocked to learn that the girl had disappeared. Gildo asked Eliana to describe his sister's precise morning movements. Eliana then admitted that she hadn't been entirely truthful. Alicia used the service as a pretext to meet with her friend, 21-year-old Danilo Restivo, a dental technician student, even though they didn't attend. Despite coming from a well-respected family, his father was the director of the local National Library branch. The young man was unpopular and frequently the object of jeering, particularly from girls. Being a good-hearted and sympathetic person, Elisa felt sorry for him, but she made it plain to him that they could not be together. However, he insisted on giving her a gift to celebrate her passing her exams, so she consented to meet him that day. Danilo and Elisa made plans to meet at the church as the service was coming to an end at 11:30 a.m. Eliana unintentionally ran into Angelica, another friend, while she was waiting outside. The girls thought they might have missed Elisa in the crowd, but they didn't see her leave the church. Gildo called Danilo's house and demanded an explanation because he was the last person to see his sister. According to Danilo, they sat at the altar and talked for 15 minutes during their meeting. Restivo stayed behind to pray after Elisa left the church, and that was the last time he saw her. After a few hours, Elisa didn't come home, so her brother Luciano went to see Restivo in person. Danilo's responses showed signs of nervousness and evasiveness. Luciano inquired as to what had happened after noticing a big bandage on his left hand. Restivo described how he cut his hand after tripping at a construction site. "I don't know where the girl is," he repeated. After Elisa's family called the police to report her missing, they asked that Restivo be questioned. However, their request was denied, and they were told to return home and wait for the girl to come back on her own. Gildo went back to the church because he had run out of options, but the door was locked. He made arrangements to enter and conducted another search of the building. He saw another locked door behind the altar, leading to the church's upper floor. When Gildo requested that door be opened as well, he was told that the priest, Father Domenico Sabbia, who had gone to a spa resort for a few days, was the only one with a key. When the police eventually spoke with Danilo 2 days later, after the girl had not returned, he stated that Elisa was unhappy at home and wanted to flee to Naples, but he attempted to talk her out of this plan. According to his version, he remained in the church while she left after their brief conversation. He said he asked her for advice about Paula, another girl he wanted to date, but he didn't mention the gift for Elisa. He returned home after the talk via a construction site where he had been with Paula just days before, where he had cut his hand after falling from an unfinished escalator. Investigators questioned whether Danilo was telling the truth. First of all, his statements were surprisingly accurate. Second, Elisa's desire to flee her devoted family was not supported by any evidence. Lastly, it was unclear how he fell head first from the escalator that was still under construction, only cutting his hand and avoiding breaking his glasses. When the police came to the Restivo's house, they asked to see the clothes their son was wearing that day. But without a warrant, Danilo's father wouldn't cooperate. Persuaded that Restivo was concealing something, the police checked his name in the database before leaving empty-handed. When he attacked other boys while playing with them at the age of 14, it turned out that he had already run afoul of the law. And it wasn't just that. 3 female students who lived close to his home accused him of stalking a few months ago. By calling girls at home and describing their attire, or playing them spooky music from the horror film Profondo Rosso, he obviously enjoyed making them feel afraid. Additionally, investigators learned that Danilo had a very peculiar habit. He enjoyed chopping off random people's hair while they were on public transit. Despite hearing about these incidents, the police were unable to establish Restivo. Meanwhile, word of Alicia Clapp's disappearance spread swiftly across the nation, and pranksters kept calling the family to say they had the girl and she was okay. While some of the messages claimed to have seen the girl in a white Fiat Uno, the police ignored the majority of these calls. The problem is that on that particular day, Elisa's friend Angelica disclosed that Ercilio Gegari, a 20-year-old admirer of hers, was out and about in the city center. Ercilio and his family had just arrived from Albania. Ercilio denied attending the church when he was asked to testify, and he gave the police the names of friends who could verify his alibi. But not only did his friends not believe his account, they also claimed that he was in the city center on the day the girl vanished. Additionally, one witness named Ercilio as the driver of a white Fiat Uno, which is the same model of vehicle that multiple witnesses reported seeing Elisa in on the day of her disappearance. When the police discovered Elisa's diary, which was missing several pages, suspicions of Ercilio's involvement increased. After reconstructing pieces of those pages, forensic specialists found that some words were written in Albanian. Ercilio was questioned again, and each time his account was altered. He once asserted that Danilo Restivo gave him instructions to deny knowing one another. Ercilio was eventually accused of providing false testimony. The police received an anonymous call in December. According to the female caller, she saw Elisa in Rome. Elisa had reportedly been assaulted and coerced into a white Fiat Uno. "Please help her and help me," the voice said toward the end of the call. The recorded call was analyzed and the results were shocking. Eliana was the caller. Because she was known to alter her version of events, investigators had long been suspicious of her statements. She was accused of providing false testimony, just like Ercilio. Detectives eventually concluded that Elisa was dead and that Danilo was to blame for her disappearance, even though they could not totally rule out the possibility that the girl had fled from home. He might have forced other people she knew to tell lies to the police, but they had nothing to accuse him or any other suspect of, other than false testimony in the absence of a body. However, the Claps family believed that powerful individuals, such as Danilo's father's friends and the priest of the church where she vanished, were defending the reputation of their daughter's murderer, even though all other churches were happy to have a box placed in the building where anyone could anonymously leave a note with information about Elisa. Father Domenico Sabia, in particular, forbade anyone from entering the church's attic. He even made an effort to deny ever knowing Danilo. But this was swiftly refuted when a picture of the two of them together on Danilo's 18th birthday appeared. Danilo Restivo was eventually taken into custody for providing false testimony after all the information was gathered. He received a 20-month prison sentence after being found guilty. Gildo was astounded by the legal system after the trial, questioning how someone could be found guilty of providing false testimony and still not be forced to tell the whole truth. However, Danilo was released after serving half of his sentence. There was nothing else the police could accuse him of. Because Eliana and Ursi allegedly gave false testimony out of fear for their own lives, rather than to muddle the investigation, the judge did not find them guilty of perjury. Numerous rumors surfaced on the second anniversary of Elisa's disappearance in Potenza, including claims that she was being sold by human traffickers, was in the hands of the Sicilian mafia, or had a covert relationship with a priest. People who demanded money in exchange for information about the girl harassed the family on a regular basis. Elisa's family actively promoted public interest in the case in spite of the challenges. They developed a website to offer updates on the investigation as the internet started to gain popularity. An email purportedly written by Elisa appeared on the website on April 23, 1999. She said she was living in Brazil after leaving Potenza. The girl explained that she was unhappy and had to leave forever, but she also begged for forgiveness for hurting her family. "This will be my first and last letter to the family," she added. Filomena fervently hoped her daughter was still alive and well. Her sons weren't persuaded, though. They engaged a private investigator to track down the email's IP address because they knew their sister had left the house without cash or a passport, only to find out it was sent from a Potenza internet cafe rather than Brazil. Danilo Restivo was in the cafe when the email was sent, according to a list of all the patrons that day that the cafe staff had provided. Believing that Danilo had come up with this scheme to persuade them to stop looking for the girl, Elisa's family called the police right away and insisted on questioning him. They were informed, nevertheless, that there was nothing further they could do and that the investigation's active phase was over. 2,000 kilometers north of Potenza is the resort town of Bournemouth, which is situated on Britain's southern coast. For the Barnett family in Bournemouth, Tuesday morning, November 12, 2002, began as any other Tuesday morning. After dropping her children, Caitlin, age 11, and Terry, age 14, off at school, Heather Barnett, 48, came home after 8:30 a.m. As usual, Heather was eager to start working and have her morning tea. She made custom pillowcases, curtains, and other items from home. That day was no different from the many orders she always had. Terry and Caitlin came home from school a few hours later. Their mother was undoubtedly at home because her car was parked in the driveway and the radio was on, so the kids were a little uncomfortable with the unlocked front door. Their mother didn't answer. Caitlin called for her brother after looking in every room but the bathroom. She didn't want to enter for some reason. The kids knocked and got no answer, so they pushed the door, which slowly opened to reveal a horrifying scene. Evidently the victim of a very heinous crime, their mother lay on the floor. After phoning 911, Terry escorted his yelling sister outside to await the arrival of the police and ambulance. The neighbor across the street saw the two agitated kids while they were parking their car. Assuring the kids that they would be safe in their house, they took them inside. When the police arrived, they found no evidence of forced entry and that nothing had been stolen. Shortly after the woman dropped her kids off at school, the actual crime took place. Luminol testing showed that the woman's size 9 shoe prints led from the restroom to her workshop before abruptly vanishing in the center of the space. Before leaving the house, the murderer had obviously changed out of their filthy shoes and put on clean ones they had brought. The fibers found on the woman's body suggested that the offender had gloves on. Every piece of evidence suggested that the crime was well planned. The murderer arrived armed with gloves, a knife, a hammer, and a change of clothes and shoes. One piece of evidence, though, was left behind. A green hand towel that had been stained with Heather's blood was resting on the workshop chair. Only the murderer could have put the towel there, given its location and the fact that it did not belong to the family. Before putting on new clothes, they used it to clean their hands and face of the blood. The hair that was discovered in the woman's hands, however, was the most intriguing piece of evidence. At first, the police thought she had successfully removed a hair from the offender, but forensic examination showed something different. The hair in one hand belonged to Heather, but the hair in the other belonged to another woman, and it had been neatly cut with a sharp tool. Speaking with Caitlin and Terry, the detective discovered that their extra house keys had vanished a week prior to the murder. Although they changed the locks, they had suspicions because their neighbor had just come to get curtains for his girlfriend. The children were consoled by the same neighbor, an Italian man they called Danny. After moving to Britain in May 2002, Danilo Restivo, known to his neighbors as Danny, married Fiona Mozingo, an Italian woman he met online. Their residence was right across the street from Heather Barnett's. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they spoke with Danilo right away, and he quickly told them that he had an alibi for the whole morning. He said he went to classes at a computer center after taking a bus. His statements were fully supported by the police when they looked through his bus ticket and the center's registration log. However, Danilo grudgingly led the detective to the bathroom, where his sneakers were soaking in a bucket of bleach, when an officer came to his house 5 days later to take DNA samples and asked to see the shoes he had on the day of the crime. "I'm cleaning them," he explained. The detective became suspicious of this and seized the shoes. The sneakers did not, however, match the footprints that were discovered in Heather's home. The police had cause to suspect Danilo Restivo, despite the absence of concrete proof, because of his dubious actions when it came to cleaning his sneakers. When they chose to search a database for his name, they discovered something startling. Restivo's name had previously been connected to a criminal investigation. He might have been connected to the disappearance of Alicia Canales, a young Italian girl more than 10 years ago. His alibi for that case was also re-examined by investigators, who discovered that it was not as credible as first believed. He registered at a time that was rather awkwardly changed from 10:28 to 9:28 in the computer center's logbook. Nothing would have stopped him from getting off at the next stop and going back to Heather's house, even though he had a bus ticket with the allotted travel time. Additionally, at 9:24, a man who looked like him was seen on security footage crossing the street close to Heather's residence. Unfortunately, the man could not be precisely identified due to the poor quality of the video. However, Danilo was the main suspect in a case for the second time in his life, but this time, all of the evidence against him was circumstantial. When the detectives called the Potenza police, they learned of Danilo's uncommon fetish of chopping off the hair of unidentified girls. The investigators' conviction that he was involved in the crime was only reinforced by this information. When the police started monitoring Danilo Restivo in April 2004, they soon discovered another questionable behavior. Restivo enjoyed going to a secluded park in Throop, which is close to Bournemouth. There he would hide behind bushes and watch girls walking their dogs or jogging. Wearing 2 sets of clothes, waterproof pants, gloves, sunglasses, and a hooded sweatshirt that covered his face, he was in the park on May 12 despite the nearly summery weather. The police were worried that they wouldn't be able to stop another murder because of his suspicious behavior. A number of uniformed officers approached the suspect while posing as investigators of car thefts in the park and requested to examine his possessions in order to conceal the surveillance. Police discovered what they dubbed Restivo's murder kit, which included a big knife, ski mask, gloves, scissors, wet wipes, and trash bags. Remaining composed, Restivo said he had located the knife in the grass and had taken it to protect the kids. He claimed to be gathering insects for his pet lizard when asked what he was doing in the park. He was hiding in the park bushes, and even the police had to concede that it was a reasonable explanation. Once more, the detectives had nothing tangible to present to Danilo. The decision was made to switch strategies and ask for public support. The goal of the investigation was to identify the owner of the hair strands that were discovered in Heather's hand. They contacted the media in Italy and Britain, and since 2002, when Restivo relocated to Bournemouth, they have received a lot of calls from girls who have had their hair cut in incidents involving public transit in Britain. None of the DNA samples that the girls gave matched the hair that was discovered at the scene of the crime. The investigation stalled for a while until the hair strand was re-examined in 2007 using a new technique that could identify the hair's previous residence. It was discovered that the hair belonged to a girl who lived in the UK, but had traveled to Tampa, Florida, a few weeks after visiting Valencia, Spain, 2 months prior to having her hair cut. Motivated by such specific information, the police made another unsuccessful attempt to contact the public. The police worry that the girl might have been a victim of the killer's prior crime, but it's also possible that she was just not paying attention to the news. In spite of this early setback, science ultimately contributed to the case. Since technology had greatly improved by 2009, forensic specialists re-examined the green towel from Heather's home in the hopes of finding something new. This time, the specialists were able to distinguish Heather's blood from someone else's perspiration and skin fragments. An expert said that there was only a 1 in 5,7,000 chance that it was someone else's DNA, even though it couldn't be said with absolute certainty that it was Danilo Restivo's. Blood traces were discovered on the insoles of Restivo's sneakers when they were inspected that year using more advanced methods. This meant that when Restivo put on the shoes, his socks had blood on them. It supported the detective's hypothesis that the offender had brought an extra pair of shoes. Unfortunately, DNA analysis was completely impossible due to the bleach used, thus preventing Danilo and Heather's deaths from being directly linked. Restivo changed his clothes, put on gloves, and used bleach to get rid of bloodstains because he was aware of the evidence he might leave behind. Knowing what might link him to the crime scene, he made every effort to prevent it. He had a plan, was ready, and followed it. Thankfully, Restivo would eventually be charged with Heather's murder, but not before a terrible discovery was made in Italy. Something unexpected occurred in Potenza on March 17, 2010. The local church where Alicia had vanished years before was being repaired by workers. The attic door was no longer locked, and the priest had died 2 years earlier. 2 workers went upstairs, one using a flashlight to light his path while looking for roof damage. At that moment, he caught sight of something concealed behind construction debris in the room's corner. He was horrified to discover that he was staring at a mummified corpse. The girl's watch, glasses, and shoes were discovered on her body and were used to identify her. 17 years after going missing, Alicia Claps was found in the same church. She had died on the day of her disappearance, and her body had been dragged away and hidden, as the forensic examiner later concluded. Her body was found to have evidence of violence. However, several hair strands discovered in her hands, and a few more close to the body, were the most damning pieces of evidence. Professor Vincenzo Pascali in Rome was tasked with analyzing a sample of foreign DNA discovered on the girl's body, but, to put it mildly, he carried out the investigation rather sloppily and had ties to the church where the crime was committed. He said that the DNA did not match Danilo Restivo, but when the investigator decided to confirm this and sent the sample to another lab, it did match Restivo's DNA. The professor was placed on 18 months of work suspension, and on May 19, 2010, Restivo was arrested. The jury found Danilo guilty of Heather's murder on June 30, 2011. Following 5 hours of deliberation, he received a life sentence without the chance of release. But after he prevailed in an appeal on November 21, 2012, the court modified the punishment for Heather's murder and gave him a minimum of 40 years in prison. Restivo was found guilty of Alicia Claps' murder and given a 30-year prison sentence in absentia on November 11, 2011. Investigators believe it is crucial to look into Danilo Restivo's relationship to other unsolved crimes in both Italy and Britain because of his obvious propensity for murder. It is thought that he was most likely involved in the death of a 27-year-old North Korean student studying English in Bournemouth. 2 months prior to Heather's murder, on July 12, 2002, The girl, who went by the name Jung-uk Shin, Loki, was making her way home on foot following an evening spent with friends. She was fatally injured by an unidentified attacker just 3 blocks from Restivo's residence. By yelling at him, Loki was able to repel him, and he even told the medical staff that the assailant was wearing a ski mask. After 3 tries, another man was found guilty of this crime, but his conviction was based only on the testimony of a female informant who had previously made false statements and frequently found herself intoxicated. There were many inconsistencies in her story, and she failed to mention the killer's ski mask. The 2 girls' physical similarities lend credence to the idea that Restivo was involved. Furthermore, the fact that the murder took place on the 12th of the month, as did the killings of Alicia and Heather, as well as the fact that Restivo visited the park where his murder kit was discovered, indicates the importance of this date to him. The length of the knife found in the park with Danilo is the same as the wound on Loki's body. Furthermore, different hair strands were discovered on the sidewalk close to Loki, but it was challenging to pinpoint their exact origin because of the nearby hair salon. From a legal standpoint, Loki's case is over. 2 murders have been formally charged against Danilo Restivo. Investigators are certain that there might be additional victims, though. Elisa's body was meticulously concealed, but Heather's was cruelly displayed for her own kids to see. Experts say that this shows that the criminal changed and that he was unable to stop on his own. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. A terrible crime is depicted in the tragic events of November 28, 2014 in Fort Worth, Texas. An apartment complex resident named Alicia Ann Harris, 31, was the target of a vicious and premeditated attack. The events that transpired on that fateful day raised troubling doubts regarding the motivation behind this barbaric deed. The incident started when a worried apartment complex resident called 911 on December 12th. Having called day 1 on a telephone, she called day 209. Emergency personnel hurried to the scene after they reported a fire in one of the units. The fact that this incident would turn into a murder investigation was unknown to them. The apartment was occupied by Alicia Ann Harris when it caught fire. Nobody was able to verify at first whether Ashley was in the burning apartment. Firefighters fought the fire with courage and were able to contain it. The terrible truth was revealed only after the fire was extinguished. Since Ashley had been in her apartment the entire time, police concluded that the fire was not an accident because of Ashley's body. Ashley had been severely beaten, as evidenced by the pool of blood surrounding her lifeless body. Her ankles suffered the same fate as her hands, which were brutally bound with duct tape, leaving her helpless. There were more indications of violence. Her body was scarred by burns, and she had endured the pain of strangulation. Moreover, her throat had been brutally cut, adding to the horror. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that this was a carefully thought out and horrifyingly carried out murder, rather than merely a tragic accident or an isolated act of violence. After committing this horrible crime, the evidence suggested that someone had purposefully set the apartment on fire. The offender had also sprayed rubbing alcohol on Ashley's bed and other parts of her apartment, seemingly in an effort to cover up any evidence of their actions. But the horrific reality had not been hidden by the fire. The case's apparent lack of motivation was one confusing feature. Since Ashley's keys were the only item missing from her apartment, investigators were left wondering, what could motivate someone to attack an innocent woman in such a vicious and heartless manner? As law enforcement looked for answers, justice, and closure for Alicia Ann Harris's bereaved family, the murder investigation would surely be a difficult and heartbreaking one. The police started looking for answers. Interviews with Ashley's neighbors marked the start of their adventure. One of them, Stephen Lee, lived in an apartment next door. He described an odd sighting at around 6:30 a.m. that fateful morning. He was smoking a cigarette on his balcony when he spotted an unknown car parked close by. The car in question was a sleek black Infiniti G35, which was unusual in their peaceful neighborhood. This observation would turn out to be a key clue in the mystery that was developing. But Stephen Lee's story wasn't the only piece of the puzzle. At around 7:30 a.m., Ashley's neighbor Patrick Sweet, who lived directly below her apartment, told the police a terrifying revelation. A spine-tingling scream reverberated from above, startling and upsetting Patrick as he was startled out of his morning routine. After that, he heard a number of disturbing sounds, such as what sounded like a heavy thud and frantic, gasping breaths. He was terrified, but his carbon monoxide detector's blaring alarm was what finally got him to act. He became aware that a fire was occurring, so he quickly called 911 to solve the mystery of Ashley's disappearance. Ashley was employed as an assistant manager at an American Eagle store in the Hulen Mall, and the police painstakingly tracked her movements on the day in question. Their investigation revealed that she had eaten dinner in one of the apartments in their complex on Thanksgiving Day with her close friend Alexis Torres and a group of acquaintances. After dinner, Ashley went to work. The Black Friday sales craze during Ashley's work shift made for a long and exhausting evening. Alexis kindly volunteered to watch Ashley's cherished dog, Nala. Ashley is back at home. Was marked by the early morning. At approximately 3:15 a.m., Alexis visited briefly before leaving after 4 a.m. The timeline started to become crucial to the investigation at this point. According to the police, Ashley died suddenly between 4:15 and 7:30 in the morning. Because of this crucial period, the authorities were keen to find and talk to the owner of the enigmatic black Infiniti G35 in order to provide insight into what happened during those hours. After discovering the black Infiniti G35, the police made the decision to interrogate Alexis, Ashley's friend. She said she didn't know who owned the car. They are intrigued, though, by a tip from Christopher "Chris" Cravey, Ashley's boss. He told the police that he knew a woman named Carol Cervantes, who was a driver of one of these vehicles. The plot twist was that Carter had been fired in August after having previously worked at Ashley Leah's American Eagle store. The police began monitoring Carter's home after obtaining this lead. The following Saturday morning at 8 a.m., their patience paid off when they saw Carter leave her apartment and get into her Infiniti G35 with a man. After that, the man drove her to Hulen Mall, where he parked after dropping her off at the entrance. When the police came to question him, they found that he was actually Clarence, Carter's boyfriend. David Mallory, who used to work at the same American Eagle store, became suspicious when Clarence was unable to provide his driver's license when asked, which resulted in his arrest. Officers observed some odd details about him while he was at the police station. The plastic price tag fastener was still on his brand new ski mask, which showed no signs of wear. In addition, his lower lip, which was visibly swollen even after Clarence was arrested, looked like a recent injury. Despite being seen entering the mall, Carter was never seen again. Instead, she was apprehended at her apartment complex, where she appeared to be doing laundry and taken in for interrogation. Her initial claim that she had not left the apartment complex that day was refuted by surveillance footage, which showed her leaving the mall and making her way home. According to the police, she may have decided to walk the 2 miles home after spotting them conversing with Clarence in the mall parking lot. Notably, they noticed minor scratches on her arms as the puzzle pieces came together. The police had to determine whether Carter and Clarence were involved in Ashley's terrible death, and if so, what the motivation was for the gruesome events that had taken place. A troubling picture of the circumstances leading up to Ashley's untimely death was painted by additional evidence that surfaced. An important turning point in the investigation was when Ashley's missing keys were found, since it turned out that they also provided access to the American Eagle store where she worked. Given that Ashley's keys could open the store safe, the police concluded that Carter and Clarence had planned Ashley's murder. Stealing what they thought was tens of thousands of dollars, presumably amassed from Black Friday sales, seemed to be the crux of their evil scheme. Armed with Ashley's keys, they carried out their plan on a fateful Saturday morning, but when they got to the store, they ran into an unforeseen problem. Their attempt at robbery was foiled by the fact that the locks had already been changed. Additional incriminating evidence was discovered during the search of Carter and Clarence's apartment. They discovered a taser box, a plastic tub with bungee cords and a rope, a lock in a kitchen drawer, and some discarded duct tape. They also found a broken deadbolt lock, 2 more locks that looked like they were used for practice and were marked as lock-picking practice locks, and the black Infiniti G35, a key vehicle in the investigation, which also had sinister secrets inside. They found a plastic bag inside a black garbage bag, a sharpening stone that was probably used for a knife, a 9mm cartridge, a cell phone, a walkie-talkie, and a sheathed buck knife. Notably, they also discovered a kitchen knife, an unopened tarp, and a toboggan with a hole cut in it. The finding was perhaps the most concerning. 3 of a loaded Glock 19 concealed beneath the driver's seat with a bullet in the chamber. The disturbing picture of Carter and Clarence's role in Ashley's murder was painted by these strong pieces of evidence. The state decided not to pursue the death penalty after both defendants were charged with capital murder. Instead, it sought life in prison without the possibility of release for both of them. Carter and Clarence upheld their not guilty pleas in spite of the overwhelming evidence against them, paving the way for a torturous court battle that would ultimately decide their fate. Although the prosecution gave both defendants a largely consistent story, the court cases of Carter, Carol Cervantes, and Clarence, David Mallory, developed independently. But after Carter's case was heard, attention turned to proving that she was the alleged mastermind of the crime. The prosecution believed that Carter and Clarence had several reasons for wanting to hurt Ashlia. First, they thought the two wanted Ashlia's keys, which would allow them to enter the store safe and the large amount of money they assumed was kept there, especially after the Black Friday sales. The prosecution also claimed that Carter and Clarence wanted to exact revenge on Ashley. An additional layer of personal animosity was introduced into the situation when they blamed her for their dismissal. The court proceedings explored the individuals' personal histories. In June 2014, Ashley took over as store manager while her boss, Chris, was on medical leave. An important part of the operation had been played by Carter, the store's assistant manager. Notably, on August 24, 2014, she had also employed Clarence, her boyfriend, to work with her at the same place. A sizable amount of $18,000 inexplicably vanished from the American Eagle store's safe. When Ashlia, who was in charge of locking the store that evening, noticed that the back door had been left open, suspicion was cast on Carter. Clarence was identified in surveillance footage as the person who had broken into the safe and stolen the cash. This finding signaled the start of a series of events that would ultimately result in a tragic conclusion. Chris, Ashlia's boss, didn't find out that Carter had employed Clarence until after the theft. It was shocking to learn that Clarence had a history with the American Eagle brand, having worked at an Amarillo store. However, his record in the American Eagle system was marked as non-rehirable, meaning he should not be employed at any American Eagle location. Chris revealed something shocking. In order to evade detection and get around any warning signs, Carter had changed Clarence's name and social security number in the system and manipulated his personnel file. This information implied a troubling degree of Carter and Clarence's collusion. It became clear as hostilities increased that Carter and Clarence had been plotting Ashley's kidnapping and key retrieval. Images of Ashley's apartment, her apartment door, and her car were among the incriminating evidence found on their cell phones. On their cell phones, police also found latitude and longitude coordinates. The terrifying story was further enhanced by Detective Cedillo's testimony, which disclosed that one of Clarence's texts included coordinates that, when entered into Google Earth, identified a location close to Lufkin, Texas. Detective Cedillo discovered a terrifying hole at this location that was 6 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. It looked grimly like a grave for a human. The prosecution argued that the original plan was to kidnap Ashlia, threaten her with a pistol, and then kill her somewhere else. But when Ashley refused to let them into her apartment, their plans took a sinister turn, and she tragically died there. More disturbing evidence surfaced. 2 shovels, a box of plastic sheeting, and a box of Craftsman sockets were found by police when they searched Clarence's Cadillac, indicating a sinister and planned motive. These disclosures presented an unsettling image of a well-thought-out crime in which Carter and Clarence were purportedly driven by retaliation as well as financial gain. As the trial went on, the prosecution called witnesses who provided more insight into the terrible circumstances surrounding Ashlia's passing. Jeff Kaiser, Ashley's close friend and neighbor, was one such witness. Jeff described the terrifying morning when he was startled awake by the sound of fire alarms, recognizing that Ashley's apartment was in danger, and he acted quickly after noticing her car was still parked outside. He hurried upstairs without thinking and kicked down Ashley's apartment door with courage. When Jeff walked in, he saw a chaotic scene. The apartment was filled with smoke, and the sprinkler system sprayed water, making the place dangerous and confusing. Even though it was dangerous, Jeff tried to crawl toward the kitchen to get to Ash, but the dense smoke soon overpowered him and he had to back off to get some fresh air. Unfazed, he made 2 more heroic attempts, but the smoke was too thick to handle. Luckily, rescue efforts were taken over by firefighters who had already arrived on the scene. Arson investigator Wallace E. Hood Jr. offered crucial information about the fire's cause. He stated in his testimony that he was able to pinpoint several places where the fire started, including Ashley's bed and the closet. One particularly unsettling discovery was the smoke detector's purposeful removal and hiding under the mattress. These discoveries suggested a malevolent and deliberate act meant to hide the fire and make Ashley's chances of surviving even more difficult. With a string of gripping incidents and testimony, the courtroom drama went on. The prosecution showed surveillance footage taken in front of the American Eagle store on November 29 at around 2 in the morning, which showed an enigmatic individual trying to operate the gate lock. The prosecution claimed it was Carter, but the person's face was hidden. The altered locks made it impossible for them to unlock and raise the gate, despite their obvious attempts. This implied that Carter might have had plans involving the crime or the store. Unaware that the police were observing them, Carter and Clarence returned to the mall at 8 a.m. that same day, the court was informed. Given the previous unsuccessful attempt to enter the store, this raised concerns about their intentions and behavior. In the parking lot of the mall, Clarence was taken into custody. He told the police that Carter had gone inside to get some documents. Carter was not present in the mall when the police searched it, though. Suspicions regarding her movements and activities were raised when she was eventually found at her apartment complex. Important details regarding Ashley's injuries were supplied by Dr. Richard Fries, a deputy medical examiner at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office. The extent of her physical trauma was graphically depicted by the autopsy. Among Ashley's many wounds were cuts to her cheek, scalp, and left side of her face. Her chin was scraped, her lip had laceration and scrape marks, and her right side was marred by a patterned bruise, with additional bruises discovered around her left eye and between her eyes. The most unsettling finding was probably a star-shaped cut behind her left ear with a bruise surrounding it, which the medical examiner determined was the result of a pistol blow. The testimony described Ashley's experience in a distressing way, implying that she had been beaten viciously and savagely. Ashley sustained multiple wounds, including a knife wound to her neck, bruising and abrasions to her right arm, chest, and neck. Ashley suffered multiple blows to her face, according to testimony from Dr. Fries, a witness in the case. Additionally, he mentioned that Ashley's eyes had patachi, which suggested that she might have been strangled or suffocated. Dr. Fries clarified that a fractured cricoid, a neck cartilage, is more frequently linked to severe force or auto accidents and is rarely observed in asphyxia or strangulation cases. Ashley's death was ruled a homicide after he determined that she died from asphyxia and blunt force trauma to her head and neck. Carter's trial was surrounded by a compelling and heartbreaking courtroom drama. The foundation of her defense was the claim that she was not responsible for Ashley's untimely death. She bravely removed the layers of fear and manipulation that had surrounded her life by taking the stand to testify in her own defense. Carter's testimony portrayed Clarence as a domineering and dangerous man, painting an unsettling picture of their relationship. She disclosed that he had a terrifying amount of control over her day-to-day activities, including deciding when she was allowed to eat and drink. As she admitted to trying to rob the American Eagle store, the entire courtroom listened intently, but she maintained that Clarence's threatening words were what forced her to commit this crime. She told of the terrifying time he pulled out a gun and gave her the order to steal. To make matters worse for her, he claimed that if she refused to accept the money, a dangerous threat would be waiting outside her parents' house, threatening their lives. Carter's story took a darker turn when she described a horrific experience in which she was raped by 2 unidentified men. She claimed that Clarence himself had allowed these attackers to enter her apartment, and she had to endure the unspeakable cruelty of their acts. Carter adamantly insisted that Ashley was innocent on the fateful night of her murder. She testified that she was asleep in her bed and did not know where Clarence was at the time. She strongly denied any role in Ashley's death and firmly stated that she was not involved in the tragic incident. In a remarkably quick decision that took only 2 hours, The jury remained skeptical, despite Carter's compelling testimony, and returned a guilty verdict. Carter was given a life sentence without the chance of release as a result. That was not the end of the case. Clarence also appeared in court, arguing that he was innocent of Ashley's murder, but the same lack of response was given to his claims. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, just like Carter, after the jury, clearly unimpressed by his claims, found him guilty as charged. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. We'll talk about what happened in Everett, Washington, on September 20, 2017 at 1:55 a.m., when multiple people called 911 after hearing loud explosions as soon as the police showed up. They discovered a horrifying image on the doorstep 10 minutes later. Directly outside the door was Alicia Canales McGuire, 24. Sadly, she had already passed away. Thanks to CCTV footage and social media, investigators were able to solve this tragic case. Alicia was born on October 29, 1992, in Mount Vernon, Washington, to Manuel and Michelle Canales. She spent a significant amount of her adult life working as a caregiver because she enjoyed caring for others and always wanted to assist everyone. Raised on a farm, Alicia began working at the age of 5. She frequently went back to assist on the family farm because she understood the importance of hard work. Alicia loved spending time with her family, and she saw and talked to them often, always remembering to say "I love you" when she said goodbye. She and her spouse, Bradley, resided in Bird's View. In July 2017, Alicia and Brad tied the knot in a stunning beach ceremony at Deception Pass. As a result, investigators quickly discovered that Alicia did not reside in the home where she passed away. It belonged to her sister, Anna Karina, who shared it with her 3 kids. Amanda asked Alicia to watch her kids while she was away because she had to travel to New York for work. Alicia was glad to assist because she loved her nephew and nieces. 2 months prior, she had tied the knot and was eager to begin a family of her own. One of the people who called 911 was the stay-in nanny who was in the house with her. When she went downstairs after hearing gunshots, she discovered Alicia motionless and lying at the front door. When the police officers got to the scene, they looked at the house first. They had to see if the criminal was inside. They made sure that the only people in the house were Amanda's kids and the nanny. By closely inspecting everything, the police began searching for evidence after the terrified kids were removed from the house. The house had a car parked in front of it. Beside it were shell casings. It indicated that the person who shot Alicia was standing close to the vehicle, just in front of the front door. The door frame was struck by several bullets. Just outside the door, Alicia was lying face down. It did not appear to be a robbery. The house was not a mess. Furthermore, it appeared that the criminal had not even gone inside the house. However, why and by whom would someone wish to kill Alicia? The detectives suspected that it was a case of mistaken identity after learning that it was her sister's home. The investigators questioned Amanda, who may have been the target, but she was in New York when the nanny, who was also present in the house when the crime was committed, relaxed. They inquired as to whether she knew who would want to harm her or if she saw the person who shot Alicia. The nanny claimed that when she heard gunfire, she was upstairs. She noticed that Alicia was motionless and face down on the floor when she looked down. She called 911 because she was afraid and didn't see the person who had shot Alicia, the nanny. As far as she was aware, she told investigators, Alicia and her husband Bradley got along well, but she provided the first important lead to the police. According to her, there were issues between Amanda, Alicia's sister, and her former spouse, Kevin Lewis. The detectives discovered from looking through the local sheriff's office reports that this was not the first time the police had been called to this address. Every incident had something to do with family disputes between Amanda and Kevin Lewis. The detectives were therefore intrigued by this version. Kevin Lewis lived in a different area of Everett, so they located his home address and went there before dawn to speak with him. It was dark in his home. During the conversation, Kevin answered the door when they knocked. "Talk to Lewis." "She should be home," he said in response to the officer's question about his ex-wife's whereabouts. He appeared to have just awoken. He was asked to tell the detectives where he had slept. He claimed that his mother and sister could verify that he had spent the entire night at home. When the detectives told him that there had been a shooting in the home where his children lived, he didn't inquire as to why they were there. It was odd that he didn't show any emotion. He should have inquired about his children's well-being as a parent, but he chose not to do so. Kevin looked shocked and said, "Really, that was the end of our conversation?" when the detectives informed him that Amanda had been out of town on business. While strolling down the street, the detectives noticed that 2 nearby homes had security cameras that they could use to verify Kevin Lewis's story. He said that instead of going out, he spent the entire night at home. However, after reviewing the video, the investigators discovered that approximately 40 minutes prior to the assault on Alicia, a car was pulling up alongside Kevin's driveway. Then someone who looked a lot like Kevin came out the front door, approached this car, and got in. The vehicle drove off a short while later. The quality of the recording prevented the police from conclusively identifying Kevin as the next victim. The footage was seen by the investigators from a different camera. Despite being able to examine the car more closely, they were unable to identify it. They could only make out that the car was light in color. About 20 minutes later, they saw the car return after fast-forwarding the recording. But they had one important detail to notice. This car's front right rim was different from the other 3. The front right rim was dark, while the other 3 were light. Kevin Lewis, who was in the first recording, got out of the car and went back to his house when the car came to a stop close to it. Approximately 20 minutes prior to the 911 calls regarding a shooting, this man, whoever he was, entered the house. The car then drove off and never came back. The drive from Kevin's house to Amanda's was 15 minutes. This could indicate that the car had enough time to reach Amanda's house, or it could indicate that the car was unrelated to the shooting. It was too soon to say. Amanda learned of her sister's passing. She was in New York a few hours later when their father called to inform them that Alicia had passed away. Alicia married, was content, and hoped to start a family of her own, but now her family had to grieve for her. Amanda said she had no doubt that her ex-husband Kevin was the one who shot Alicia when the investigators asked her if she believed he could have done it. Anna Canales wasn't prepared to publicly acknowledge how toxic her relationship with her ex had been, even after her 8-year marriage ended. Despite having 3 young children, 2 girls and a boy, and spending 10 years with Kevin Lewis, Amanda had been extremely unhappy and continued to live in fear of him even after their June 2017 divorce. Amanda had been bruised by Lewis's previous physical abuse, and even after they had parted ways, he continued to threaten her. Amanda was granted full custody of their children in August 2017. Lewis was ordered to pay $800 a month in lieu of child support. For Amanda, it was a new beginning. As a single mother, she was grateful for the support she received from her family and concentrated on her home in Everett, Washington. Amanda was threatened by Kevin. He threatened to kill her. He had the training because he had served in the military. Although her sister passed away, Amanda thought she was the one who had been attacked. Rather, she even obtained a restraining order against Kevin, which he repeatedly broke. Amanda and their 3 kids were both terrified when he wandered outside her house and peered in the windows. Kevin was not charged by the police with any of the restraining order violations. Amanda was returning home late at night and parked in the driveway next to her house when she was brutally beaten as she got out of her car a few weeks prior to her sister's death. Someone attacked her as soon as she opened her car door. She didn't have time to see the attacker's face because everything happened so quickly, but given everything, she was certain that Kevin Lewis, 30, was responsible for Alicia Canales McGuire's death. The investigators thought he was planning to kill his ex-wife. At the time, Kevin was unaware that she was in New York. He was unaware that Alicia had been asked by Amanda to watch her kids while she was away. Today, though, this version contained an error. Kevin would have been at his house when the shooting occurred, if the man in the video was indeed him. He was also given an alibi by his mother and sister. As a result, the police kept looking into the incident and took into account various theories. After going back to Amanda's house to take another look at everything and analyzing the bullet trajectory, experts came to the conclusion that Alicia was shot while the door was partially open and that the shooter fired at least 7 shots that entered the house from the outside. According to the evidence found at the scene, someone fired a shot while standing next to the garage, then proceeded to the house's door and fired once more inside. Multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso were determined by the medical examiner to be the cause of Alicia's death. She was hit by 5 shots. There were gunpowder stippling injuries in 2 of the wounds. The last 2 gunshot wounds to the head were most likely the last 2 wounds administered, according to the medical examiner, who testified that he was unable to ascertain the order of the 5 shots. The 7 shell casings discovered at the crime scene were fired from the same firearm, the experts concluded. Alicia was shot at close range, resulting in head injuries. After examining this version, the investigators were unable to locate any proof to support this. Due to the rarity of this particular brand of shell casings, the police were also interested in the ones discovered at the crime scene. These casings were produced in Russia and sold under the Tulimo name. The investigators hoped to identify the seller of these cartridges and possibly the buyer because the brand was not very popular. The investigators found that this brand of cartridges was sold by Walmart. The crime scene was close to one of these shops. Walmart representatives informed the detectives that they had CCTV footage showing a man paying for 9mm Tulimo cartridges that he had recently purchased. The detectives went straight to Walmart to view the video. They thought Kevin Lewis might be the buyer when they made the recording on September 18, 2 days before Alicia passed away, but they were mistaken. The police now knew the identity of the man in the video, who wasn't Kevin, because he used a credit card to make the purchase. When the investigators looked into this man, they discovered no relationship to the nanny, Alicia Amanda, or Kevin Lewis. They now had to find fresh evidence. The investigators looked through every version that was available at the time before turning to Amanda for fresh details about Kevin. They had a good relationship at first, she said. Kevin was restrained in his behavior during the honeymoon. She didn't anticipate that he would start hitting her and grow more hostile over time. After their relationship ended, Amanda was granted full custody of the children, a restraining order was issued, and they got divorced. However, a distraught Amanda was aware that Alicia wasn't supposed to be killed in the shooting and thought it was a case of mistaken identity. She told police that Lewis had somehow planned the attack and that Kevin was home when it happened. The footage from the night of Alicia's death has been examined by the investigators once more. They saw something now that they had never seen before. The man who left his house, Kevin, can be seen approaching the car and settling into the back seat behind the driver in this grainy video. Why, though, did he not take the front passenger seat? As the investigators searched for a solution, they came to the conclusion that someone else was already occupying the front passenger seat. As a result, by the time the car arrived at Kevin Lewis's house, there were most likely 2 people inside, which may have been the reason he had to take the back seat. There was insufficient evidence for the police to connect Kevin to Alicia's demise. But after gathering proof of Kevin's assaults on his ex-wife Amanda, they detained him in November 2018 and gave him a 3-year prison sentence. In the meantime, Alicia's case was still unresolved over a year after her death. The only break in this case came in 2019 when a woman with crucial information called the police station. A girl from nearby Spokane who had attended a party and boasted about being hired to kill someone on York Road, the street where Alicia was shot, was the source of the detective's tip. Given that Spokane was roughly 5 hours away from Everett, the police were unsure of what to believe. According to the caller, she was at a party when a young woman walked in. Angelica is who she is. The latter boasted about her involvement in the crime with her boyfriend. This woman claims that Angelica stated that a person died as a result of being shot in the head. They were hired to shoot from around the corner by the children's father. Additionally, according to Angelica, they killed the wrong person. A case of mistaken identity was involved in the incident. The specifics of this case have never been made public by the police. Alicia's head injury was only known to the investigators and her family. Angelica's knowledge of numerous details about the crime piqued the police's interest as they searched for her. Her true name, Alexis Hale, was discovered by the investigators. On her social media, they discovered pictures of her brandishing a 9mm handgun. It might have been the crime's weapon. Additionally, there were multiple videos with a man in the background. It was Jaredon Phelps, Alexis's boyfriend. Alexis Hale shared a video taken through a car's windshield that examined the road signs the night before Alicia passed away. The investigators were able to pinpoint the precise location of the car at that time, which was roughly 10 minutes away from Kevin Lewis's home. A few hours after Alicia's passing, Jaredon Phelps boasted about a wad of cash in the video below. One of the 5 comments that the investigators saw on Phelps's social media photo was from his aunt. They identified his aunt as Kevin Lewis's mother after clicking on her social media profile. As it happened, Kevin's cousin was Jaredon Phelps. The police had good reason to make an arrest. Alexis Hale was the first to be placed in handcuffs. She screamed and claimed that because she was only 17 years old, the police were unable to arrest her. She demanded a lawyer because she understood why she had been arrested. Jaredon Phelps was taken into custody by the police in a different area of the city at the same time. Phelps and Hale had driven from Spokane to Everett to carry out the shooting, according to the investigators' phone records. Additionally, early on September 20, Lewis's neighbor's security footage captured someone getting into a car. At 1:13 a.m. EM, the man in the white top departed, and at 1:37 a.m. he returned. Following Alicia's passing, Lewis was wearing a white top when the police visited him. Alexis kept everything from the investigators. At the time, Kevin Lewis was serving a 3-year prison sentence for assaulting Amanda. As a result, the researchers were hoping that Phelps would provide some information. The investigators suspected it was Kevin Lewis, and now the police had a confession and the name of the man who hired Hale and Phelps. Phelps provided them with additional information about the crime when they brought him to the scene. Following Alicia Canales McGuire's death in September 2017, Kevin Lewis, who was already incarcerated on an unrelated charge, was charged with aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder in July 2020. At the age of 20, he entered a guilty plea to first-degree premeditated murder. He was given a 31-year prison sentence by the court. At age 18, Hale entered a guilty plea to the same charge and received a 15-year sentence. During the trial, Phelps testified that he had committed the crime for financial gain and to gain notoriety. Lewis gave Phelps money, which he used to purchase a Ferragamo belt buckle, Timberland boots, and some tattoos. He asserted that he had given his ex-girlfriend $200 after she obtained the pistol from a family member. Later that year, Lewis entered a not guilty plea and was put on trial by the prosecution. Claimed that in order to get his ex-wife out of the way, he had given $2,400 to his cousin and his girlfriend. Although he had made them into adolescent killers, Alicia had unintentionally opened the door in a tragic case of mistaken identity. Lewis gave Phelps an envelope of cash on the way back. Phelps said Lewis had led them to the house, but that he didn't know who the target was. Phelps and Hale dropped Lewis back at his house and then went back to the spot Lewis had indicated. After getting out of the car, the two headed for the house. Hale went to knock on the front door and Phelps stopped beside the garage. Hale left as soon as Alicia opened the front door, and Phelps fired the gun until it was empty. The gun's muzzle crossed the threshold as Phelps fired the first few shots from his position close to the garage, and the final 2 after approaching the front porch. The final 2 shots were directed at the head and neck region. Phelps and Hale returned in their vehicle because of a glove that might have been left at the scene. They turned around and departed when they saw police cars upon their return. After getting GPS directions, they returned to Spokane by car. The defense contended that Lewis had only said to move the target out of the way and had never used the word kill in his conversation with his cousin. However, the court was reminded by the prosecution of Kevin's violent past and his threats against Amanda. They claimed that power and control are at the heart of this case, and it was obvious what the goal was. Amanda described him as pure evil. He had played with their kids, who were in the house when she was supposed to die, she remembered incredulously. I assumed you loved them, but a person who truly cares for someone would never want to put them in danger or cause them any trauma. Did you care that they would have woken up to find their own mother dead, lying in a pool of blood, if it had been just me home that night? She asked. She also discussed finding her kids a safe place to live. She informed Louis that, in spite of all the harm you caused, they are recovering and moving on. In case you were wondering, they never inquire about or discuss you. The jury found Lewis guilty of first-degree murder in less than 3.5 hours after a 6-week trial in November 2021. In January 2022, 34 Kevin was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Records show that Lewis is still incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla County, where Judge Thompson also ordered him to have no contact with his former wife, his children, Phelps, or Hale for the remainder of his life. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. A woman who was determined to return home safely to her children risked her life to get out of a predator's grasp. She had no idea that her courage in assisting in the kidnapper's capture would reveal a much more sinister force and save the lives of innumerable others. By working with the police, she was able to expose the rapist's true identity as well as that of a serial killer. Her testimony's credibility was called into question, though, given the process used to retrieve her memories of the assault. Shackled in chains, the prisoner paced the field, moving across the ground with deliberate steps. He lost himself in recollections, his gaze never leaving the tall yellow grass. The simple clothes he used to wear, jeans, a shirt, and a cap, had become luxurious, and his once dark auburn beard had gone completely gray since his last visit. He was now with police officers, the very people he had avoided for almost 20 years. The prisoner had recently broken his lengthy silence by confessing to the disappearances of multiple young women in the 1990s and agreeing to help the police locate their bodies, which were buried in a field outside of Houston, Texas. Families in Texas and Oklahoma had been tormented for years by the loss of their daughters, who had disappeared in the middle of routine situations, like going for a morning run, getting washed, or coming home from a theater group party. There were no answers for a long time. Finally, the man who had caused their pain, a 56-year-old Texas prisoner who was charged with violence and kidnapping but not murder, spoke. At least 7 victims, including 4 girls who did not survive their interactions with him, were connected to him by the police. When taken as a whole, these cases depicted a serial killer posing as a good Samaritan who preyed on a particular kind of young brunette who was discovered on the streets. Although his surprising admission helped reveal the truth about what had happened to some of the victims, the family's most important question was still, why? Sandra Soppel, then 19 years old, completed her high school education and began working as an exotic dancer in May 1997. She was bringing up 2 kids and getting ready to have a third. Sandra's intelligence and determination, which would ultimately save her life and open a Pandora's box of horrific crimes, were characterized by those who knew her. An frightened young woman called the police on May 17, 1997. Sandra was the one. She described the nightmare she had just gone through. She had been abducted and had thrown herself out of a moving car in a last-ditch attempt to get away. She was taken to a nearby hospital after reporting the crime, and despite her severe injuries, she insisted on talking to detectives. Keeping the kidnapper from hurting anyone else was her top priority. But the fall from the car had messed with her memory, and she had forgotten important details of the crime in her subconscious. Later on, Sandra's recollection would prove to be crucial in cracking the case. After failing to find any early leads, the police changed their strategy and had Sandra put under hypnosis. She remembered specifics of the attack after the session. She remembered the kidnapper's face in addition to the make, model, and color of his vehicle. The police's suspicions about a possible suspect were confirmed by this discovery. Sandra was asked to choose her assailant from a lineup a few weeks following the hypnosis. A man named William Lewis Rice was indicated by her gesture. The police had seen Rice before. He had long been of interest due to his criminal past and actions. Although Rice had a challenging upbringing, he had a strong bond with his mother, who would stop at nothing to help him. Rice was born and raised on a farm in Yukon, Oklahoma. He left school to work as a horseshoer in the 9th grade. He married Judy Fleming, a shy girl he met in Anadarko, Oklahoma, when he was 19 years old. Judy remembered that if she didn't date Rice, he would shoot himself. She initially thought he had good intentions, but she quickly discovered he was capable of extreme cruelty. Their turbulent marriage was characterized by violence and adultery. After Rice broke into her new house, beat her, and put a knife to her throat, Judy finally filed for divorce. Even after getting married and getting divorced once more, Rice's violence spiraled out of control due to his growing hatred of women. Rice's first attack is known to have occurred in the spring of 1986, when her Mustang broke down on Interstate 35. The 19-year-old aerobics instructor, daughter of a sheriff's deputy, found herself stranded. Rice offered to help, but instead he kidnapped her, taped her hands together, and pushed her into his truck's sleeper cabin. After saying he loved her and that they would live together in Houston, he later attacked her. By calling her family from a payphone and feigning the need to use the restroom, the girl was able to get away. For the kidnapping and assault, Rice was taken into custody and given a 25-year prison term. However, because of prosecutorial misconduct, an appellate court lowered his sentence to 10 years in October 1996. Following his release, Rice went back to Anadarko to live with his mother, where he assimilated. His background was unknown to many locals, and he came across as modest and courteous. But by the spring of 1997, local young women were starting to go missing. Now in his late 30s, Rice had relocated to Houston, where he continued shoeing horses and working on construction sites. Although his actions raised suspicions, there was no hard proof that he was responsible for the crimes. When Sandra Sapal identified Rice, it was the last straw for the police. By connecting him to Sandra's attack and other unresolved crimes, they compiled evidence against him. Rice's trial took place in April 1998. In her testimony regarding her kidnapping, Sandra described how Rice had threatened her with a knife, cut her tire, and enticed her to his vehicle. She talked about how she thought her risky escape had saved her life. The defense, however, contested her testimony, claiming that Rice's name and photo might have distorted her memory and that hypnosis was unreliable. In spite of these defenses, the jury convicted Rice of aggravated kidnapping and gave him a 60-year prison term. The community experienced brief respite after Rice was imprisoned, but it wasn't until years later that he came forward with his most sinister secrets. Detectives were able to re-examine cold cases in the mid-2000s thanks to developments in DNA testing. In one instance, Tiffany Johnston, a 19-year-old recently married woman, was kidnapped in July 1997 from a car wash in Bethany, Oklahoma. Although her body was discovered the following day, the case wasn't resolved until 2015, when Rice was connected to the crime by DNA evidence. In order to avoid being executed, Rice consented to assist law enforcement, which helped them locate the remains of two additional victims, Kelly Cox and Jessica Kane, who were interred in the Texas killing fields. Although Rice's motivations were still unknown, his confessions gave his victims' families closure. Some saw his cooperation as a perverted form of pride, while others thought it was motivated by a wish to avoid the death penalty. In any case, his crimes left a path of destruction, and those he had harmed received some justice when he was ultimately sentenced to death. In addition to saving her own life, Sandra Sapal's courage and tenacity helped expose a serial killer who had been terrorizing communities for years. Her story serves as a testament to the tenacity of people who are not intimidated into silence, and her bravery made sure that Rice could no longer prey on innocent lives. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This story is about a pair of lovesick maniacs from England who have dedicated their lives to murdering children. Working together, the lovers would lure them into a deserted location and subject them to hellish torments. Even after their arrest, the criminals found ways to torture the teenagers, while prominent British politicians lobbied for their release. Ian Brady and Myra Henley were born on January 2, 1938, in Glasgow, Scotland. His mother, Margaret Stewart, worked as a waitress, and his father's identity is unknown, according to her. He was a local journalist who died 3 months before her son's birth. Margaret gave 3-month-old Ian to the Sloan family, who had 4 children of their own. Ian took their last name but continued to see his mother regularly. At the age of 9, he and his family moved to the town of Pollock, where he enrolled in the local school. From an early age, Ian's acquaintances noticed his cruelty to animals and later described him as the Terrible. He dropped out of school and started working at a shipyard, but after less than a year, he changed jobs and became a messenger butcher. He was put on trial again at the age of 16. His girlfriend, Grant, went to a dance with another boy, and Ian threatened her with a knife. The judge sentenced him to probation with the condition that he live with his birth mother and her new husband, so he relocated to Manchester. Patrick Brady, as you might expect, adopted his stepfather's surname and hired him as a fruit porter at the market, but the hard work did not appeal to Ian a year later. The young man was caught stealing a bag of lead seals with the intention of selling them on the black market for extra money. Due to his age, he was sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile facility. While serving his sentence, he obtained alcohol and became inebriated. As a result, he was transferred to a stricter institution. Myra Hindley was born in Manchester on July 23, 1942, 4 years after Ian. Her family was not ideal. Her alcoholic father frequently beat his daughter and instilled violence in her. After her parents had another daughter, the family moved into a dilapidated house with only one room that was mostly safe. Myra was sent to live with her grandmother. Her father taught the girl self-defense in a brutal manner. He demanded that his daughter fight back against any abuser and would not tolerate weakness. He once made her beat up a neighbor's boy for scratching her cheek. Later, the maniac described this incident as her first victory. Another shock during the girl's childhood was the death of her close friend, 13-year-old Michael Higgins. He invited her to swim in the nearby abandoned reservoir, but she declined. As a result, the boy drowned, and Myra felt bad. Following that incident, the girl gradually began to explore religion. She joined the parish of the local church and became godmother to Higgins' nephew. When she was 16, the girl started working as a clerk in a small firm. Her responsibilities were straightforward: brew coffee, fetch something, and print documents. Despite this, she quickly gained the team's trust after receiving her first paycheck. Myra Spence will be out of work for a week. Then her co-workers chipped in, giving her the same amount from their pockets around the same time. The girl intended to get engaged to her boyfriend, Ronnie Sinclair, but later changed her mind. She changed jobs when she was 17, but she didn't seem to enjoy the new job as much. 6 months later, she was fired for chronic absenteeism. At the same time, Myra went to the judo section, where even the guys refused to fight her. Once she got a taste for it, she couldn't stop in time, causing serious injury to her opponents. At the same time, Myra colored her hair pink. The future maniacs met at Millward, where they both found jobs. Myra was 19 years old when Ian turned 23. According to the young woman's diary, their first conversation occurred on July 27, 1961. Myra initially sympathized with the young man despite his criminal record, but eventually lost interest. However, 6 months after they met, Ian asked her out to a movie, and the young woman agreed that the choice of a movie for a first date was as strange as possible, a documentary about the Nuremberg trials, and that the couple continued to go to the movies for the most violent films. And soon Brady instilled in Myra an enduring interest in Nazis. They frequently sat down together to read materials and books about the atrocities of the Third Reich while drinking German wine, which piqued her interest. Myra began to imitate the Aryan young woman model, dyeing her hair white and wearing dark red lipstick. Later, she dramatically changed her wardrobe to more candid short skirts, leather jackets, and high-heeled shoes. The couple continued to work together, but their attention to the team dwindled with each passing day. Calling the relationship perfect at the time was impossible. In a letter to an old friend, Myra revealed that Ian had slipped her sleeping pills. After a few months, Ian and Myra decided to rob a bank. The young woman rented a van and attempted to learn how to shoot, but failed to master the skill. Despite this, she eventually acquired a rifle and 2 revolvers. The couple eventually abandoned the idea, and they were likely safe. They were eventually given new housing through a government program because their previous one was deemed unsafe. Brady was also the first to express Myra's deepest desire to commit the perfect murder. He was inspired by Meyer Levin's book Coercion, in which 2 teenagers plotted to kill a 12-year-old boy in order to avoid the death penalty. The young woman was undeterred by this revelation and agreed to assist her lover. The plan was extremely simple. Myra and Ian planned to find the victim along the road, then take her to a remote location and kill her. Brady told Myra to drive the van down the street alone while he followed on a motorcycle. After spotting a suitable victim, the maniac was about to signal his accomplice with his headlamp, after which she was to persuade the victim to get into the car on the evening of July 12th, only 1 month after moving in. They went out to hunt. Brady chose the first victim and signaled to Myra, but she drove past him, catching up with her. He demanded explanations. The young woman revealed that the maniac's target was 7-year-old Marie Rock, who lived next door to her mother. According to Myra, they would have a very difficult time getting away with it because the police would immediately begin searching for such a young child. The couple then continued down the street, looking for another victim. At 8 p.m., Brady made his decision on Fraxmer Street, and Myra recognized the girl once more. She turned out to be Pauline Reed, her younger sister's 16-year-old friend who was on her way to the disco. Determined to act, Myra stopped and offered her a ride, and the girl got into the car, which took her to a deserted location. Myra made up a story about losing an expensive glove on the Saddleworth. Heath was popular among locals due to its abundant supply of peat, which was used as fertilizer. Pauline agreed to assist her acquaintance shortly after arriving at the location. Brady approached them. Myra informed them that the girl was her boyfriend, and he would assist them in their search. The final outcome of the situation remains unknown. The problem is that Brady and Myra tell 2 different stories, but they all end up with the same outcome. In Ian's version, Pauline is murdered. The girl was abused and killed by him and his lover. Myra, on the other hand, she claimed that she was left in the car while Pauline and Brady allegedly went to look for the glove. After a while, the maniac returned alone and reported the girl's death. He led Myra to her body, and she noticed that the girl's clothes were severely wrinkled. Myra's version does not make sense to me. What excuse would a 16-year-old girl have for going on a search with a stranger while Myra was sitting in the car? Most likely, with this story, the maniac was attempting to absolve herself of direct involvement in the murder after burying the body. Myra and Brady packed the motorcycle into the van and drove home. On the way, they saw Pauline's mother and brother looking for the girl. After nearly 6 months apart, the couple decided to act again, but this time with a 12-year-old boy. When the boy saw the victim in a store, they struck up a conversation and offered the child a ride home as an added incentive. Brady offered the boy a drink once inside the car. He specified that the alcohol be picked up at their house, but first a pair of maniacs asked the child to assist in the discovery of a fictional glove in Saddleworth, much to his dismay. The boy agreed. The situation then proceeded in the same manner as before. Hindley claimed Brady had taken the child from the car, abused and killed him. The maniac reiterated that she was not present during the entire ordeal. 7 months later, on June 16, 1964, the couple abducted 12-year-old Keith Bennett while he was on his way to his grandmother's home. He met the same fate, violence, and murder. The police, who were unaware of serial killers at the time, initially arrested the boy's stepfather but discovered no evidence against him. The next murder occurred 6 months later, on December 26, 1964. It is unclear whether they were able to maintain this cycle unintentionally, or if the pause was necessary to lull the police into a state of alertness. You'd think that if children began disappearing one after another in a small town, law enforcement would devote all of their efforts to apprehending the maniac, but on December 26th of that year, with only a few days until the New Year and Christmas, Ian and Myra decided to give their town another unpleasant gift. This time, the situation has changed dramatically. They searched for their new victim on the playground. Leslie Ann Downey, 10, was scattering shopping bags near the car. The maniacs asked the girl to assist with the collection after asking her to help them transport the bags home. The girl consented and was assaulted. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the couple began abusing the unfortunate child in her home for an extended period of time. After playing with her, the sadist killed her and returned the corpse to Saddleworth. Myra insisted that she was not present during the murder. The attentive viewer recalls that the couple lived with Myra's grandmother. Where was she at the time of all these atrocities? On the morning of the murder, the caring granddaughter sent her to a relative's house and forbade her from returning home. Despite this, the old woman attempted to return in the evening, but Myra refused to let her in. The next day, after cleaning up the girl's corpse in the house, she returned with the grandmother. The couple committed the next murder. 10 months later, breaking a strange cycle, but that wasn't the only thing that made this case unique at the time. Maureen, Myra's younger sister, David Smith, 17, was already married. The couple frequently spent time together, and the young man quickly won Brady's heart. First and foremost, he was eager to hear everything the maniac had to say, including speculations about Nazi philosophical speeches, dreams of robbing a bank, and so forth. Second, he had already been to the police station several times, just like Ian had, despite the fact that their crimes were very similar. Smith was caught breaking into someone else's home and inflicting serious battery. Perhaps Brady regarded him as a protege, a new member of the improvised gang. As time passed, the young man paid more and more visits to their home, and during lengthy conversations with Ian, talk of murder began to emerge. Myra became concerned that their relative would run to the police, but Brady insisted that he thought Smith was his own and trusted him. He even told her that he and Smith would be committing a crime together soon. Myra and Brady went to Manchester Central Station to look for a new victim, and Ian quickly made his decision. He met 17-year-old Edward Evans, who agreed to come to his house after a brief conversation. When the company arrived at the house, they drank wine, and Brady eventually sent Myra to get Smith. The action picked up quickly after he arrived. Myra's words allowed us to reconstruct the following picture. She had gone into the kitchen to feed the dogs. Smith stayed in the living room. Several minutes later, she heard screams and fighting. The girl entered the room and saw Evans and Brady struggling. After a brief fight, Ian grabbed an axe and struck the victim several times with its blade. He strangled the unconscious Evans by wrapping an electrical wire around his neck. Brady wanted to take the body to the wasteland right away, but it was too heavy. Additionally, the maniac twisted his leg during the fight. Finally, he decided to leave it at home and travel with Smith to Saddleworth. The next day, he asked him to stay so he could understand the gravity of his actions. Smith initially agreed to help Brady dispose of the body. Perhaps he was too scared to refuse. The young man may not have shared the homicidal couple's sadistic tendencies, given his history of minor law breaking. After listening, she requested that he report the horror to the police. Smith listened to her and called the cops from a nearby phone booth at 6 a.m. His story differed slightly from what Myra would later say. The police archives include an exact transcript of that call. Brady led me into the kitchen and offered me 3 small buns with a drink. I nodded and asked for the rest. Ian went into the living room while I waited in the kitchen. After a few minutes, I heard a wild scream like a woman screaming in a high-pitched voice. After hearing Myra's screams, I ran into the living room and saw a young man lying face up on the couch with his feet on the floor. Ian was standing over him, holding an axe over his head and hitting him on the left side of his head. The officer knocked down the maniac's door, and Myra opened it. He took out his identification card and quickly made his way into the house, where he caught Brady, who was writing an explanatory letter to work and asking for time off due to an injury. The officer told a made-up story about investigating gun cases and asked to see the house. Myra agreed, and he inspected all but one room. The young man described how Ian bragged about killing 3 or 4 children and even gave the approximate location. Brady allegedly met Evans in a bar, and a fight ensued, and somehow the boy came to his house. Smith had also testified against Brady at the time, and the police believed his testimony much more. There, the police found many interesting finds. Notebooks, lists of names, photographs of Brady and Myra Simpson, and explicit pictures of them. The notebooks contain lists of coded words, which the police were quickly able to decipher. It turned out that Brady kept records of burial sites, weapons, and methods of killing. As it was impossible to assert the exact location of all the victims on the basis of this information, it was rather superficial. Another book contained a list of names including all the victims of the couple, but here's the strange thing: in addition to the victims we know, the list contained the names of other children. With all this information, the investigators questioned Brady again, and his story was once again very weak. Allegedly, the list contained the names of his friends, and he had joked about killing children in his conversation with Smith. At the same time, the police managed to find the very suitcases, the contents of which shocked everyone. There were photographs of a naked girl. Also found in them were audio. tapes, one of which would soon become perhaps the most damning evidence in history. It contained cries and pleas for help. The tapes contained recordings of Nazi plays, and one of the mothers recognized her daughter Leslie Ann Downey's voice. The suitcases also contained photographs of the marshland backdrop, various batons, lashes, and erotic magazines. A recording of the girl screaming and a photograph of her would have been enough to PR. On October 10th, police discovered a child whose hands were sticking out of the ground due to the body's composition. The child's identity will not be confirmed until after 150 officers were involved in the search for bodies in the swamps. Initially, they focused on the area near Route 628, but later, based on witness statements, they moved to Route 635, where they made their first discovery. On April 19, 1966, Myra and Brady were charged with the murder of Edward Evans Lessell in one of the most high-profile trials in British history. He did not deny taking them, but claimed that the girl was brought to their home by two men and then taken away to an unknown destination. The police temporarily halted their search of the swamps due to the onset of winter. During the trial, David Smith, the main witness, signed a contract with a local newspaper to give an exclusive interview if Myra and Brady were convicted. The newspaper paid him a significant sum of money for this. Shortly after his transfer to Wormwood Scrubs, Brady, who had been placed in solitary confinement, went on a hunger strike. He was unhappy with the ban on socializing with other inmates. Prison officials have decided that a child killer is going to afterlife rather quickly as a result of his dramatic weight loss. The maniac was transferred to the hospital wing, where his life took on new colors. He was allowed to watch television and do house cleaning work. At the same time, juvenile delinquents with mental disabilities were admitted to the hospital wing of the prison. In 1981, one of these teenagers said that Brady had forced him into intimate contact. Later, similar statements by the victims surfaced repeatedly, taking advantage of access to secluded corners of the prison, as a janitor Ian led his victims there. When prison officials learned of this, he was banned from cleaning, but no further charges were filed. More interestingly, he was left in the hospital wing next to the same teenagers. It would seem like such a thing was possible, but there was nothing the chief medical officer of the prison could do about it. British law mandates the prisoners be assisted, and Brady used this skillfully. He threatened to resume his hunger strike every time he talked about being transferred back to a cell. In 1982, a harsh decision was made to transfer the maniac to another prison with stricter conditions. However, 3 years later, in 1985, Brady was declared insane. Thanks to this, another transfer awaited him at Ashworth Psychiatric Hospital. Many of you may have wondered how such a violent sadist managed not only to establish a comfortable life in prison, but also to do his dirty work with teenagers. The answer might surprise you. He was helped by the Earl of Langford. Frank Pakenham, one of the leading politicians of the time, gave favors and privileges. Brady approached him while in prison, and soon the Earl actually sided with him. Of course, there was no talk of helping to get the charges dropped, but Ian didn't count on that. Pakenham helped him stay in the hospital by appealing to Britain's Home Security himself. After that, the politician repeatedly bailed out his newly minted friend by pulling the right strings in the British upper echelons. But the main request to Brady was that he could not fulfill the maniac dream of a date with Myra. On that note, let's move back a bit to Hindley's story. Her life behind bars was much less intense, but not without interesting moments. While in prison, she managed to have a mistress, but more interestingly, she was able to get out of there for a while, not long after beginning her sentence. Hindley began a torrid affair with the warden, Patricia Cairns. Together, they planned an escape but were caught by the police in the preparation stage. As a result, Cairns went from a prison employee to a prisoner for 6 years in November 1986. Keith Bennett's mother wrote her a letter begging her to tell her about her son's fate. It was filled with pain and despair, and the last lines were clear. "I am a simple woman working in the kitchens of Chrissy's hospital. It took me 5 weeks to write this letter, because it is very important to me that it be accepted by you, as it is a plea for help." Myra was taken to Saddleworth Heath, which was cordoned off by 200 police officers along its perimeter, and her task was to locate the bodies of children whose fate was still unknown. The detective couldn't tell if Hindley was moved by this or if there were other motives, but she agreed to participate in the investigation under tight security. Since then, Myra has been out on the heath several more times, and in 1987, The caps were successful, and that's what you call the discovery of Leslie Ann Downey's body. And later Pauline reads, once Brady learned of his former lover's cooperation with the investigation, he also decided to partially confess to what he had done. True, the maniac asked to be given the means and opportunity to leave his life, which no one could legally do, having been refused. Ian still talked and also expressed his desire to help the police in their search for the remaining bodies. On July 3rd of that year, he was taken to Saddleworth, where he was never able to pinpoint Keith Bennett's burial site. Later, frustrated detectives refused to make another trip to the heath with the maniac, and he turned to reporters. In a letter, he indirectly admitted that he killed 5 other children, but police could not confirm this information. 6 months later, Brady still secured a second visit to Saddleworth, but again proved useless. Keith's body has yet to be discovered. In 2003, the police resumed their search using the most advanced technology, but it yielded no results. They only had 40-year-old photos, making finding the right place next to impossible. Myra made a long attempt to obtain an early release. She wrote appeals that secured Lord Longford's support, and by the early Nazis, almost everyone was convinced that her release was inevitable, unfortunately for her life. Otherwise, Hennel. Yes. The cause was complications from a heart condition. The rest of Brady's life was less rosy, while Myra's release was seriously considered. Ian's release from the asylum was being given the go-ahead by senior British officials. With each year in the asylum, he gradually went mad until he lost what little, if any, sanity he had left. In spite of this, he managed to live long enough until he was 79 years old. In 2017, the maniac died of cancer, and the urn with his ashes was buried at the bottom of the sea. Brady's death made a few people sad. His namesake Police Federation branch chairman Ian Hansen noted that such monsters deserve no sympathy. That was the end of the story of the child-murdering lovers, but in Britain, their names will long be remembered. Ian and Myra are a prime example of inhumanity, boundless impotence, and cynicism, as well as a total lack of morality. Just by remembering the history of the past, we are able to prevent the events of the future, so our work is not in vain. Please share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and thank you for watching.